Before we begin, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the polished gold of European palaces, behind the velvet curtains of noble courts, or beneath the glittering crowns of kings and queens? History books tell us about their victories, their elegance, and their grandeur. But what they rarely tell us are the secrets, the betrayals, the hidden scandals, and the golden lies that propped up the entire world of aristocracy. Welcome, my friend, to History 1. If you are someone who craves to uncover what was never meant to be spoken aloud, then you are in the right place. Make sure to subscribe so that you won't miss the next time we reveal another truth that was meant to stay buried. And now, let us step together into a story wrapped in gold, but soaked in shadows. This is Golden Lies, the truth hidden behind the glamour of the aristocracy. It begins in a ballroom, not just any ballroom, but one lit with 1,000 candles, where diamonds on the necks of duchesses competed with the stars outside, and where powdered wigs hid faces lined with more secrets than wrinkles. Here, noblemen and women of Europe danced, smiled, and whispered. But behind the perfume and the laughter, behind the golden chandeliers and the polished marble floors, something darker stirred. The aristocracy, you see, was a theater. The noble courts of Europe were stages where every word, every gesture, every look had meaning. And just as in the theater, the most dazzling costumes often hid the ugliest truths. Take, for instance, the story whispered in hushed tones about a queen whose crown sparkled brighter than any other, but whose jewels were bought not with gold, but with betrayal. Or the tale of a duke who entertained poets and musicians, but behind closed doors made pacts that would stain his family for centuries. It is here, in these corridors of power, that the golden lies of history begin. Lies told not just to the people, but to the nobles themselves. Deceptions woven so carefully that even those who spoke them began to believe them. For behind every portrait that hangs in a gilded gallery, there is another picture, one never painted, but written in shadows. Let us peel back the curtain. Let us walk through the marble halls where whispers mattered more than swords, where secrets could dethrone kings more swiftly than armies. Let us begin with the age when Europe's aristocracy reached its glittering peak, the 17th and 18th centuries, when Versailles, Vienna, and London's palaces became the symbols of wealth, but also the hiding places of corruption. It was a time when noble blood was said to be purer, finer, more divine than that of ordinary people. Yet if one could look inside, that pure blood was often poisoned with greed, adultery, and even murder. Consider Versailles. To the outside world, it was the golden heart of France, the palace of palaces, where King Louis XIV reigned as the Sun King. His court was the envy of Europe. Music, art, feasts, endless celebrations. But what few dared to say aloud was that Versailles was also a prison of etiquette, of control, and of secrets. Every noble there, dressed in satin and lace, lived under a system where a wrong glance could mean disgrace, where a rumor could ruin an entire house. And Louis himself? He understood this game well. He fed his nobles luxury not out of kindness, but as chains. For the more they indulged in glamour, the more they drowned in debt, chained forever to him. Behind the golden halls, lies were the currency, and survival meant playing along. But it was not only in France. Across Europe, in palaces stretching from Spain to Russia, secrets bound the nobility together like mortar between stones. A prince who claimed divine wisdom might, in truth, be a pawn of his mistress. A duchess praised for her virtue might have borne children not of her husband, but of a lover hidden in her chambers. And all the while, the common people bowed, believing the glittering lie that their rulers were noble in soul as well as in blood. The truth was more dangerous, for the nobility's golden lie was not only about power, it was about survival. If the people ever saw through the mask, if they ever understood what truly went on in the shadows of palaces, then thrones would tremble, crowns would fall, and entire dynasties would vanish. And so, the lies continued, covered with music, with jewels, with words like honor and virtue. But the cracks were always there, hidden in diaries, whispered in corridors, etched into letters never meant to be read. And now we will follow these cracks. We will enter the chambers of kings and queens, the secret apartments of dukes and duchesses, and the shadowed corners where history tried to bury the truth. For the golden lies of the aristocracy are not dead. They still breathe, waiting for us to uncover them. The deeper we step into this world, the more we begin to see that the nobility was not a class of saints, but of survivors. They wore masks of dignity, but underneath those masks, fear gnawed at them like rats in the cellar. Fear of exposure, fear of disgrace, fear of losing the privileges that separated them from the ordinary masses. Let us turn our eyes for a moment to one of the most glittering figures of all, Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France. To her people, she was a symbol of excess, the young Austrian girl who danced through gilded halls while her subjects starved. They called her Madame Deficit, and stories spread that she said, "Let them eat cake." But here is the hidden truth. That phrase, so often quoted, was never spoken by her. It was a lie, crafted and spread deliberately, whispered into the ears of the people to paint her as a heartless queen. Who created this lie? Enemies at court, nobles who despised her influence, pamphleteers paid in secret, political figures who wanted the crown to crumble. The scandal was more powerful than any blade. Marie Antoinette's true secrets, however, were darker still. Within Versailles, her every move was watched, her letters intercepted. She had secret correspondences, smuggled out of the palace in coded language, revealing her fears, her desires, her political schemes. She built private rooms, hidden chambers, where she escaped the suffocating rituals of the royal court. And there, away from prying eyes, she played a different role. Not the Queen of France, but a woman who longed for freedom in a palace of gold. But hers was not the only story shaped by golden lies. In the courts of England, whispers carried through corridors of Whitehall and Hampton Court, telling tales that history books smooth over. Kings spoke of divine right, claiming their power came directly from God, but behind closed doors, their bloodlines were tangled webs of adultery and hidden children. Take King Charles II, known as the Merry Monarch. He was adored for his charm, his wit, his love of pleasure. But what of the dozens of illegitimate children he fathered with mistresses of every rank? He openly acknowledged some, showering them with titles and lands while his legitimate heirs withered away. The nobility accepted it, of course. They always did, as long as they shared in the spoils. Yet to the common eye, the monarchy still stood as a holy institution, a golden lie once more. And further east, in the vast empire of the Russian czars, the splendor of St. Petersburg masked a labyrinth of deceit. The Romanovs portrayed themselves as divinely chosen rulers, clothed in the robes of orthodoxy. But their family secrets were whispered in every salon. Children born out of wedlock, Cousins married to cousins until madness ran through their veins, and the ever-present shadow of Rasputin, the mad monk who wormed his way into the palace, not by miracles, but by exploiting secrets too dangerous to reveal. Aristocracy thrived on such illusions. To the world, they were noble, pure, chosen. But in truth, many noble families rose not by divine blessing, but by betrayal. A brother poisoned here, a rival framed there, a rumor whispered in just the right ear. These were the real foundations of aristocratic power, not gold, not God, but deceit. The more one digs into the archives of Europe's noble families, the more one discovers that the grandeur was built on carefully constructed lies. Lies told to the people, lies told to each other, and sometimes even lies told to themselves. For example, there were entire noble houses that claimed descent from heroes and saints, when in fact their bloodline had been purchased through bribes and arranged marriages. Families that spoke of honor while plotting assassinations at midnight. Kings who wore crowns lined with jewels, while beneath those crowns, their minds were filled with paranoia and guilt. And yet, these lies worked. For centuries, the people believed. They bowed. They obeyed. They even adored their rulers, unaware that behind the velvet curtains, the nobility was rotting from within. But every lie, no matter how golden, begins to tarnish. And as the centuries moved forward, cracks began to appear in the mask of the aristocracy. Rumors grew louder, scandals spread faster, and secrets that had once been buried began to claw their way into the open. This is where the story becomes even darker. For when noble secrets were exposed, the fall was not gentle. Crowns rolled on the guillotine, dynasties crumbled, and the people who once bowed began to roar. The glamour had blinded the world for so long, but as we shall see, the truth hidden behind the aristocracy's gold was always there, waiting to strike. The unraveling of the aristocracy's golden illusions was never sudden. It began as whispers, like cracks forming in a frozen lake. At first, the nobles laughed off rumors, confident in their jewels, their titles, their divine claims. But whispers have a way of becoming storms. And in Europe, once those storms broke, no crown was safe. Let us return to Versailles, where the Sun King's descendants reigned in splendor. After Louis XIV's death, the palace remained a gilded cage, but the secrets festering within its walls began to ooze into the outside world. Servants who overheard too much, pamphlets smuggled through Paris, scandalous memoirs written by mistresses. It all painted a portrait far uglier than the painted ceilings of Versailles suggested. One of the most striking revelations came not from noble enemies, but from the nobility's own blood. Take the infamous affair of the diamond necklace in the 1780s. On the surface, it was a tale of a priceless jewel, a cunning con artist, and a gullible cardinal. But underneath, it was something more. A carefully spun web designed to destroy Queen Marie Antoinette's reputation. She never touched the necklace, never plotted the scheme, yet she was portrayed as greedy, corrupt, and deceitful. Why? Because the golden lie of her purity had to be shattered. Nobles within France wanted her gone. Foreign powers wanted her weakened. And the people, hungry and desperate, were eager to believe the worst. Lies had always protected the aristocracy, but now lies were the weapon that would doom them. England, too, was no stranger to scandal. Behind the polished image of the Georgian court, stories of debauchery, gambling, and secret affairs filled the taverns of London. King George IV, when he was Prince of Wales, secretly and illegally married a Catholic widow, Maria Fitzherbert. The marriage was hidden because it violated English law, and for years it haunted the royal family. Yet in public, George presented himself as the model of nobility. Behind closed doors, he drowned in debts, bribed politicians, and lived far beyond his means, all while the people were told to honor him as a divine ruler. And what of the Habsburgs of Austria, one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe? Their golden lie was built on the idea of a sacred, unbroken bloodline, yet their obsession with marrying within the family to preserve their divine heritage gave rise to deformities, madness, and weakness. The infamous Habsburg jaw, so pronounced in portraits, was not just a feature, it was a symbol of the cost of lies. The nobility claimed strength and purity, but in truth, their very blood was poisoned by their own arrogance. Beyond the scandals of flesh and blood, there were the financial lies. Nobles across Europe flaunted wealth they did not have. They borrowed against their estates, spent fortunes on jewels and gowns, and drowned themselves in debt to maintain appearances. To admit poverty would be to admit weakness, so they gilded their lives with credit, deception, and illusion. Some noble houses, like hollow statues, glittered brightly on the outside while crumbling within. But perhaps the most dangerous secret of all was this: many of the nobility no longer believed in their own lies. Kings who claimed divine right prayed less and schemed more. Dukes who spoke of honor used assassins in the night. Queens who preached virtue locked themselves in hidden chambers with forbidden lovers. They wore crowns of gold but carried hearts of clay. The common people could not see all of this, not yet. But they could sense it. The reverence that had once held thrones steady began to erode. The lie that nobles were chosen by heaven was replaced with the suspicion that they were no different from anyone else, only richer, crueler, and far more corrupt. And once the people began to doubt, the golden mask started to crack. The guillotine in France, the revolutions in England, the uprisings in Russia, each was born not only from hunger and oppression, but from the realization that the nobility had been lying all along. Still, before we reach those storms, we must journey deeper into the palaces, into the lives of kings and queens who thought their secrets would remain buried forever. For it is in their stories, of poison, of betrayal, of forbidden desire, that the truth of the aristocracy reveals itself most clearly. For every gilded crown had a shadow, and in those shadows, the lies gleamed brighter than gold. Step with me now into the corridors of secrecy, where the chandeliers flickered and every glance could be a weapon. For it was not only nations that were ruled by golden lies, families themselves were torn apart by them. Consider the Bourbon dynasty of France. Outwardly, they were the very picture of majesty, a royal house chosen by God, enthroned by destiny. But within their palaces, brother plotted against brother, sons whispered against fathers, and alliances were built not on loyalty, but on convenience. To survive in such a family, one needed more than noble blood. One needed cunning, sharper than any sword. There was the whispered tale of the Duc d'Orléans, cousin to King Louis XVI. Publicly, he was a loyal prince of the blood. Secretly, he fed the revolutionaries who would one day tear the monarchy apart. Why? Because he too desired the throne. The nobility always preached unity, but beneath the sermons, ambition burned like fire. And sometimes, ambition wore the mask of patriotism while hiding the dagger of betrayal. Or take England's Tudors, whose dynasty still fascinates the world today. The court of Henry VIII glittered with jewels and ceremony, but what people did not see was the trail of broken bodies and broken promises left in its wake. Henry proclaimed himself the defender of the faith, yet shattered England's religious order for his own desires. 6 queens sat beside him in marriage. 2 were discarded, 2 were executed, 1 died giving him a son. And still, portraits painted him as the noble king, chosen and righteous. In truth, his court was a theater of fear, where nobles lost their heads as swiftly as they lost his favor. And the Tudors were hardly unique. Across Europe, royal marriages were weapons of diplomacy. A princess's smile could seal an alliance. Her tears could doom a nation. But behind the painted smiles, many queens were prisoners in golden cages, forced into beds they despised, raising heirs that were often not their husbands. Adultery, though never spoken of, was woven into the very fabric of dynastic survival. Whole kingdoms may have rested on children whose true fathers' names were whispered only in the dark. This too was part of the golden lie, the illusion of purity, of lineage untouched by sin. Yet every archive, every hidden diary, every letter smuggled under candlelight tells us otherwise. And then there was poison, the weapon of choice in courts where blood was too valuable to spill openly. In Renaissance Italy, families like the Borgias and the Medicis were infamous for their feasts, lavish banquets where every goblet of wine could carry death. The Vatican itself was not free from such whispers. Cardinals fell suddenly ill, rivals wasted away mysteriously. Yet always the official word was God's will. Behind the holy robes, behind the marble of cathedrals, the same game of survival played out, quiet, ruthless, and utterly hidden. But the most insidious secret of the aristocracy was not adultery, nor poison, nor betrayal. It was performance. The nobles lived their lives as actors in a play. They knew their lines: loyalty, honor, divine right. They knew their costumes: velvet cloaks, golden crowns, diamond necklaces. They knew the stage, the throne room, the chapel, the balcony where they waved to the adoring crowd. And they knew their audience, the people, hungry for stability, eager to believe in something greater than themselves. The greatest lie was that the aristocracy was greater, that their blood was touched by heaven, that their virtue was superior, that their power was eternal. But in the diaries of queens, we find fear. In the letters of kings, we find doubt. In the private rooms of palaces, we find human weakness no different from the common man: lust, greed, envy, cowardice. These were the true rulers of Europe, dressed in silk and crowned with gold. The lie endured because it had to. For if the people ever realized that their kings and nobles were not gods, not chosen, not even particularly noble, then the entire system would collapse overnight. And as history shows us, collapse was coming. Slowly at first, like the dimming of a candle, then all at once, like fire in dry fields. But before the fall, there was still grandeur, still masks of gold, still secrets locked in gilded chests. Let us walk deeper into those rooms where conspiracies were whispered over chessboards, where mistresses guided kingdoms from behind lace curtains, where entire wars were sparked by desires never written in official documents. For it is in these intimate secrets, the affairs, the betrayals, the quiet assassinations, that the truth behind the glamour of the aristocracy gleams most clearly. Let us step into a chamber where the candlelight barely reaches the corners, where velvet drapes hide not only the windows, but the whispers of what truly unfolds. For in the aristocracy, secrets were never just personal, they were political. A single affair could shift alliances. A single rumor could ignite a war. Take the story of Louis XIV, the Sun King, again. He commanded Versailles as the stage of his absolute power, but the women in his life wielded an influence history books often soften. His official mistresses, from Louise de la Vallière to Madame de Montespan, were not simply lovers. They were gatekeepers of power. Nobles, desperate for the king's favor, courted these women with bribes, promises, and even their own daughters. Behind the glittering mirrors of Versailles, where nobles lined up to bow before the king, it was often a mistress who whispered the final decision in his ear. And Madame de Montespan herself? History remembers her beauty and her charm, but there were darker whispers too. She was implicated in the infamous Affair of the Poisons, a scandal where Parisian fortune-tellers and alchemists were accused of providing nobles with love potions and poisons. Some claimed that even Montespan sought out these forbidden arts to keep the king's love. Did she? We cannot know, but the fact that such rumors flourished tells us something about the court. The glamour of Versailles rested on a foundation of suspicion, jealousy, and fear. Across the Channel, the English nobility spun its own golden lies. During the reign of Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the court was filled with plots and secrets. She wore the mask of chastity, claiming marriage only to her kingdom, yet rumors abounded of her affection for Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. The mysterious death of Dudley's wife, found at the bottom of a staircase, fueled whispers that reached every tavern and every noble hall. Officially, Elizabeth remained untouched, the untouchable virgin ruler. But in the shadows, people whispered a different story, that her golden image was a carefully crafted lie, hiding desires as human as anyone else's. And then there was Catherine the Great of Russia. To the world, she was the enlightened empress, the patron of philosophers, the modernizer of an empire. But behind the marble walls of St. Petersburg, her life was a storm of passion and peril. Her husband, Peter III, was weak, unstable, and despised. Catherine, fearing for her life and her throne, conspired with nobles and the military to overthrow him. He was soon dead, officially from natural causes, though many suspected murder. Catherine ascended as empress, her reign celebrated as glorious. Yet the golden lie remained. The story told to her people was one of divine destiny, not betrayal, not blood. Secrets, you see, were currency in the courts of Europe. Nobles hired spies as easily as they hired tailors. Letters were intercepted, coded messages passed through servants, and behind every curtain, someone was listening. To survive, one had to master the art of deception. To thrive, one had to turn lies into power. And what of the church, that other great pillar of nobility's world? Many kings ruled with the blessing of priests and popes, yet the church itself was tangled in aristocratic secrets. Bishops came from noble families, cardinals schemed for influence, and even popes were elected through bribes and bargains. Behind sermons of holiness, deals were struck in the shadows. Lands exchanged hands, fortunes were promised, and sins were forgiven, for a price. Imagine the ordinary villager, bowing his head as a nobleman passed by, believing he was witnessing a being closer to heaven than himself. He could not see the hidden child born of an affair, the noble house drowning in debt, the queen whispering to her lover by candlelight, the duke conspiring to poison his rival. To him, the nobility shone like untouchable gold, but behind that shine, rot spread silently. And that is the true danger of lies. They can glitter for centuries, they can dazzle whole nations, but once the cracks begin to show, once the mask begins to slip, the fall is catastrophic. Already, by the late 18th century, Europe was trembling. France would soon erupt in revolution. Russia's nobles would cling to their illusions, only to be torn down centuries later. England's monarchy, though surviving, would never again hold the same sacred aura. The golden lies had served their purpose. They had built empires, preserved dynasties, silenced rebellion. But no lie lasts forever. And so, as we move forward, let us peel away more of the mask. Let us enter the secret rooms where decisions that change nations were made not in parliaments or battlefields, but in whispers over silk sheets, in letters sealed with trembling hands, in cups of wine laced with poison. For this, my friend, is the true story of the nobility, not the one carved in marble statues, but the one written in shadows. Close your eyes and imagine a palace at midnight. The music has ended, the candles have burned low, and the courtiers have gone to their chambers. The corridors are quiet, yet not silent. In the distance, footsteps echo, a door creaks. A whisper passes between two figures cloaked in shadow. These are the hours when history was often written, not in grand declarations, but in secret bargains struck under cover of darkness. For the aristocracy, night was not for sleep. It was for plotting. Take the story of Philip II of Spain, ruler of the vast Habsburg Empire in the late 16th century. To the world, he was the embodiment of Catholic majesty, a king who defended the faith, a monarch who ruled with solemn dignity. His portraits show him stern, devout, draped in black. But behind that facade, Philip was consumed by paranoia. He kept meticulous notes on everyone around him, from nobles to servants, believing betrayal was always near. Letters were censored, visitors watched, even his own family lived under suspicion. The golden lie of his calm power hid a man haunted by fear, ruling not through strength, but through webs of secrecy. In Venice, another kind of secrecy reigned. The Venetian Republic was famous for its elegance and wealth, but beneath the surface, the city was ruled by the Council of Ten, a shadowy group of nobles who dealt with threats to the state. Their methods were as ruthless as they were hidden. Anonymous denunciations could be dropped into special stone mouths scattered across the city, and the accused would vanish into the dungeons of the Doge's palace. Torture, execution, silent assassinations, all carried out under the mask of legality. The Venetian nobility glittered in their masks at carnival, but their entire society was itself a mask, hiding the machinery of fear that kept them in power. And what of Austria's Empress Maria Theresa? To her subjects, she was a devoted mother, ruling with wisdom and care. Indeed, she bore 16 children, many of whom were married off into Europe's greatest dynasties. This, too, was a golden strategy: marriages as weapons, alliances forged not by swords, but by vows. Yet behind the maternal image, she was a shrewd political operator, willing to manipulate, threaten, and deceive to preserve her family's empire. Her daughter, Marie Antoinette, was one such pawn, sent to France not for love, but to cement an alliance. The image of a happy royal family was another mask, carefully painted to hide the brutal reality that children were tools in the great game of survival. The golden lies were not only for the people, they were for each other. Nobles lied to nobles as easily as kings lied to subjects. Courts thrived on gossip, each rumor carrying the power to destroy. A single accusation that a noble had spoken treason, that a queen had taken a lover, that a prince was illegitimate, could end careers, ruin families, or topple thrones. Truth was irrelevant. Perception was everything, and perception could be shaped like clay in the right hands. In Russia, this reached terrifying heights. After Peter the Great dragged his country into modernity, the Romanov court became a battlefield of intrigue. Empresses rose and fell in succession. Many seized power through coups, others poisoned in their sleep. Catherine the Great herself understood this well. After seizing the throne, she filled her court with loyal favorites, lovers who doubled as political allies. To the people, she was enlightened, a ruler of reason and progress. To her rivals, she was a spider at the center of a web, spinning lies as skillfully as any philosopher spun words. And yet, for all the deceit, the nobles believed in one truth: appearances must never falter. Even as debts crushed them, even as their families crumbled, they clung to the rituals of glamour. Balls, masquerades, jewels, hunts, ceremonies, they were shields against exposure. The show had to go on, for if the curtain ever fell, the audience, the people, would see the rot behind the gold. And indeed, the audience was beginning to see. Pamphlets spread in the streets of Paris, mocking the Queen. Satirical prints in London ridiculed the king. Even in Russia, whispers of corruption stirred among peasants who had never set foot inside a palace. The lies had held for centuries, but now they strained under the weight of truth. Yet before the collapse came the final, desperate act, the nobles clinging tighter to their illusions, spinning their lies more frantically than ever. The irony was cruel. The more they lied, the more obvious the truth became. We stand now at the edge of that collapse. But before the guillotines, before the revolutions, let us take a closer look at the last golden days of the aristocracy, their greatest splendor, their most dangerous secrets, their final attempt to dazzle the world into obedience. For it is often in the brightest glitter that the darkest shadows hide. Picture Europe in the late 18th century. The palaces had never shone brighter. Versailles glittered with fountains and mirrors. The courts of Vienna pulsed with music by Mozart and Sant. Petersburg dazzled with Catherine's architectural dreams. England, too, dressed its monarchy in pageantry more elaborate than ever before. On the surface, this was a golden age of aristocracy. But beneath that shine, the lies grew heavier, like gold masks worn too long, pressing down until they suffocated those beneath. Let us return once more to France, where the Bourbon monarchy stood at the center of splendor. Nobles paraded in gowns threaded with silver, their wigs powdered white, their jewels dazzling in candlelight. Yet many of those jewels were pawned. Many of those gowns were paid for with borrowed money. Entire noble houses were drowning in debt, pretending at wealth they did not have. The people saw gold, but the truth was rust. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, became the symbol of this contradiction. Her private retreat, the Petit Trianon, was a haven from court life. There she played shepherdess, dressing in muslin gowns, pretending to live a simple, rustic life. But this simplicity was itself a performance, more expensive than any gown of silk. The nobles who joined her in these games laughed and applauded, but outside the palace gates, starving peasants seethed. The golden lie could not hold much longer. Across the Channel, the English monarchy survived by reshaping its illusions. King George III projected the image of a family man, devoted to his queen and children. Paintings showed him not as a distant, godlike figure, but as a father, almost middle class in appearance. But the truth was far from peaceful. His mind was plagued by bouts of madness, his court fractured by factions, and his colonies in America had broken away in defiance. The family king was another mask, one that barely concealed the unraveling beneath. In Austria, the Habsburgs clung desperately to their legacy of divine blood, yet their golden lie had twisted into a curse. The intermarriages meant to preserve their purity weakened them instead. Children were born sickly, fragile, or simple-minded. Entire generations bore the deformity of the Habsburg jaw, so pronounced it sometimes made speech difficult. Still, portraits painted them as serene rulers, untouched by decay. Behind those paintings lay centuries of whispered regrets, and in Russia, Catherine the Great's brilliance masked a reality of iron and shadows. She was the enlightened empress, corresponding with Voltaire, building palaces, modernizing the empire. But to keep her throne, she relied on a secret police that silenced dissent, on lovers who doubled as guards, on fear as much as admiration. Even her rise to power, seizing the crown from her own husband, was coated in lies. Officially, Peter III died of natural causes. Unofficially, whispers claimed he was strangled on Catherine's orders. The people celebrated her rule, yet the throne on which she sat was built on betrayal. Everywhere, the nobles polished their masks more frantically than ever. Balls became more elaborate, jewels sparkled brighter, portraits grew more idealized. But the brighter the gold shone, the deeper the shadows it cast, and in those shadows, the truth whispered louder and louder, for the people were no longer blind. The rise of pamphlets, newspapers, and coffee houses spread gossip beyond the palace walls. Secrets that once stayed hidden in gilded corridors now reached the ears of common men and women. A scandal in France could become a rumor in London within weeks. A satire in Vienna could mock a king in Spain. The golden lies were no longer untouchable. And once the people saw through the glamour, the spell was broken. They no longer bowed out of awe, but out of habit, and habits can be broken. Hunger sharpened their vision. Injustice stirred their voices, and soon those voices would roar. But before the storm broke, the nobility danced harder than ever. Their final waltz, their last masquerade, their desperate attempt to hold on to a world built on illusion, a world where crowns glittered, but the heads beneath them trembled. Let us walk into that masquerade, into the final chapter of aristocratic splendor, where every jewel sparkled like a lie and every smile hid the fear of collapse. Step into that last masquerade, where the chandeliers blazed with 10,000 candles, where violins played until dawn, and where silk and perfume masked the scent of fear. This was the twilight of Europe's nobility, the moment when their golden lies shone brightest just before the darkness consumed them. In France, the storm gathered. Versailles still glittered, but the air was heavy with rumors. Pamphlets flooded Paris, mocking the queen, inventing scandals too scandalous even to repeat. They accused Marie Antoinette of excess, of depravity, of betrayal. Many of the stories were fabrications, but truth no longer mattered. What mattered was perception, and perception had turned against her. The golden lie of her innocence had shattered. She became the perfect symbol for everything the people despised. Meanwhile, the nobles danced. They held masquerades and operas as if the world outside the palace gates did not exist. They wagered fortunes at gaming tables, wrote verses to lovers, and paraded their jewels at the king's court. It was as if they believed the performance could save them, that if they smiled brightly enough, the hunger of the people would disappear. But the lies had run dry. When the revolution came, it was not subtle. The guillotine rose as the great equalizer. Nobles who had once spoken of their divine right found themselves kneeling before a blade, their blood soaking the very streets where they had once ridden in golden carriages. The glamour vanished overnight. The Sun King's descendants discovered that their crowns could not protect them. The people had seen through the lie, and there was no turning back. In Russia, the fall came slower, but no less violently. The Romanovs clung to their illusions until the very end. They hosted balls in St. Petersburg, even as peasants starved. They built palaces of marble while revolution brewed in the countryside. Tsar Nicholas II presented himself as a devoted father, a holy ruler chosen by God. But whispers of corruption, of Rasputin's dark influence, and of a royal family out of touch with its people grew louder with every passing year. By the time the revolution erupted in 1917, the golden lies could no longer hold. The Romanovs, like the Bourbons, paid with their blood. In England, the monarchy survived by transforming its lies into something new. Instead of claiming divinity, the royals claimed respectability. They reinvented themselves as symbols rather than rulers, pageantry without absolute power. It was survival through adaptation, a mask adjusted rather than destroyed. Yet even there, the scandals never ended. Mistresses, illegitimate children, political betrayals. The golden lies simply changed shape, hiding behind ceremony and tradition. And what of the smaller courts, the duchies and principalities of Europe? Many vanished quietly. Their palaces became museums, their titles meaningless, their once golden lies now curiosities for tourists to marvel at. The people no longer bowed to them, no longer believed in their illusions. They had become relics of a world that no longer existed. Here lies the final irony. For centuries, the nobility had ruled through deception, through the belief that they were different, chosen, superior. And yet, in the end, their lies could not save them. Gold could glitter, but it could not feed the hungry. Jewels could sparkle, but they could not silence the truth. Crowns could shine, but they could not prevent the blade from falling. The fall of the aristocracy was not just the collapse of individuals, it was the collapse of a system built on performance. It was the end of the great masquerade. And yet, even today, echoes remain. Modern royals and aristocrats still wear crowns, still host ceremonies, still dazzle the world with glamour. But behind the polished images, scandals still emerge, secrets still surface, and whispers still haunt the corridors of power. The golden lies have not vanished, they have merely changed their form. So, the next time you see a glittering crown, a palace of marble, or a royal procession lined with gold, remember this: what shines most brightly often hides the deepest shadows. For behind every jewel is a debt, behind every portrait, a secret, and behind every throne, a lie. This was Golden Lies, the truth hidden behind the glamour of the aristocracy. Thank you for listening with me on History 1. If you wish to hear more stories, more secrets that history tried to bury, do not forget to subscribe, because the past still whispers, and only those who listen can hear the truth.